Story 1. The Closet That Wasn't Locked. I still think about the warmth of that charger more than anything else. Not the sound I heard behind the coats, not the way my hands kept slipping on the phone when I tried to unlock it, not even how fast I moved when I finally took the kids out. Through the back door. It was that small, ordinary warmth. Because it meant somebody hadn't just been there early. It meant they were there while I was standing in the doorway breathing the same air, trying to convince myself I was imagining all of it. My name's Marin. I was 22 then, doing part-time babysitting while I finished classes at community college, and I was at this house on Alder Creek Drive in Naperville on a Thursday night. In early fall, I took a lot of evening jobs because I needed the money more than I liked the work, which is probably the honest way to say it. I was never great at being alone in other people's houses. I could do it, but I never got relaxed the way some sitters do. I had a system for it. That's what made me feel normal. Feed the kids, pajamas, story, water cups, hall light on low, then my checklist. I kept the checklist on my phone room by room. Front door locked, back door locked, first floor windows, upstairs windows, closets, lights, monitor, alarm sticker on. It sounds excessive, but it kept me from spiraling. The house was big in that clean suburban way where everything smelled faintly like detergent and fresh paint, except upstairs there was this stale fabric smell that sat under. The laundry scent, especially near the guest room. The HVAC would kick on and off with this low throat-clearing hum, and for some reason the upstairs hall always felt a little warmer than the rest of the house. Not hot. Just wrong by a few degrees. The parents left before sunset. I watched their taillights disappear, locked the front door, checked it twice, and went back in feeling stupid for already being tense. The kids were easy that night. Macy wanted the blue bowl, not the yellow one. Theo dropped peas under the table and laughed every time I reached for them. I read the same bedtime story twice because Macy said I did the rabbit voice better than her dad. By a little after 8, both of them were asleep. The monitor sat on the coffee table beside me, giving off that soft bluish light, and I started my rounds the way I always did. The first thing that bothered me was small enough that I almost didn't even count it. In the guest room upstairs, the closet door was cracked open maybe 2 inches. I remember pulling it shut because I always checked closets too. I wasn't looking for monsters or anything dramatic. I just didn't like dark openings in houses that weren't mine. I pulled it closed, pressed until I felt the latch catch, and checked the room off on my phone. Maybe 20 minutes later I went back up because I couldn't remember if I'd looked at Theo's window lock. That kind of forgetting happens to me when I'm nervous. I know that. I walked past the guest room and saw the closet open again. Just a thin black line in the white door frame. I stopped and just stared at it for a second. My first thought was that the latch was loose. Old houses do that, even nice ones. Air pressure changes, doors drift. I told myself exactly that while I walked over and shut it again. I even tested it with my fingers, opening and closing it twice. The metal catch clicked both times. I remember laughing a little under my breath because I could feel myself getting worked up over a closet door in a room nobody was using. That should have been enough. It wasn't. But I tried to make it enough. I went back downstairs, tucked one leg under me on the couch, and watched a baking show with the volume low. The baby monitor made that soft static hiss it always made between sounds. Every once in a while, Macy would roll over and the blanket would whisper against the sheets. Normal little house sounds, the kind you can fold yourself into if you stop resisting them. Then the monitor flickered. It was only for 2 seconds, maybe less. The screen filled with gray static, a dry crackling blur, and when it cleared, the camera angle was different. Not by much. Just tipped a little lower so I could see more of the rug and less of the crib rail in Theo's room. I sat up. There was a logical answer for that too. Loose mount. Cheap camera. Maybe one of the parents adjusted it earlier and I hadn't noticed what angle it started at. I actually said that out loud, quietly, to an empty living room, like hearing it would make it stronger. The problem was I stared at the screen for another full minute and couldn't stop thinking how a camera doesn't usually tilt down on its own in one clean jump. I got up, more annoyed at myself than anything, and went back upstairs. The hallway felt stuffy, warmer than downstairs, and there was that detergent smell again with something underneath it. Not rotten exactly, just stale and close. Like clothes, left too long in a suitcase. Theo's room looked fine, the camera was still on the shelf. I touched it and it felt solid. I adjusted it back a little, then stepped into the hall. That's when I heard the sound. Soft, dragging, fabric against wood. Not footsteps, not the house settling. More like someone slowly pulling a coat sleeve over a hardwood floor. It came from farther down the hall near the guest room. I stood there long enough to realize I'd been holding my breath. Then I walked toward it, slowly. Because running would have meant I thought it was something. The guest room door was open. The closet was closed. Nothing else was out of place. The bedspread was smooth. The lamp was off. The little framed print over the dresser hung straight. I opened the closet door fast this time before I could argue with myself about it, and just saw coats, spare blankets on the top shelf, a vacuum against the back wall. No person. No movement. That stale fabric smell hit me harder when the door opened, and for one weird second I thought the air felt different inside, warmer. Like a place that had been closed around. Body heat. Then I hated myself for thinking that, because it was exactly the kind of thought that makes you spiral. I shut it again and went downstairs. On the couch, I opened my checklist to make myself feel stupid in a structured way. If I could verify that I'd checked everything, maybe I'd calm down. Front door. Back door. Hall windows. Kids' rooms. Guest room. There was one green check mark next to the upstairs office. I hadn't been in the office. I remember that clearly because the office wasn't even part of my usual route until the parents asked me that night to keep the door shut so the cat wouldn't get in there. I would have remembered checking it because I would have remembered the cat part. I stared at the check mark, then reopened the app. Same thing. Office. Completed. At that point I did what anxious people always do when reality gets slippery. I started building explanations as fast as I could. Maybe I'd hit it by accident. Maybe the app auto-filled from last time. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe I was already mixing tonight up with another night in the same house. The worst thing about that kind of thinking is some of it always sounds plausible, just plausible enough to keep you sitting where you are. I went upstairs one more time and checked the office just to fix the feeling. The room smelled like printer paper and dust. Moonlight from the window made a pale square on the carpet. Everything looked untouched. I remember glancing at the desk and seeing a charging cable there too, white, loosely coiled. So later, when I found the other one, I had a moment where I wondered if I'd mixed them up. I need to say that because I still replay it, still test every memory for cracks. Back downstairs, I called the parents. I tried to sound casual. I asked if the guest room closet ever popped open and if they'd had any issues with the monitor shifting. Her mom laughed a little, not mean, just tired, and said the guest room latch had always been finicky. She said the alarm was armed, all the sensors were working, and if any door or window had opened, they would have gotten an alert on their phones. She even checked while I was on the line. Nothing. No alerts. No motion outside either. She told me I was probably hearing the vac and old wood. Before hanging up, she said, "You're okay there, Marin. Honestly, safest house in the world." That settled me more than I want to admit. There's something about another adult sounding unworried that can override your own instincts if you're already embarrassed by them. I made tea. I turned on more lights downstairs. I put the monitor beside me and watched Theo breathe in that regular baby way, one hand up by his head. The house sounded ordinary again. Refrigerator motor. A car passing outside, the vent clicking as it cooled. I thought maybe I'd just gotten into my own head because I was alone in a too quiet place. Then I noticed the monitor wasn't showing Theo's room. It was still his room, but the angle had shifted enough that the crib was partly cut off, mostly floor. A slice of dresser, no static this time, just different. My stomach did that unpleasant drop where your body reacts before the rest of you catches up. I picked up the monitor and turned the volume up. No crying. No voices. Just that faint electric hiss. I went upstairs again, fast now, but trying not to sound fast on the stairs. Theo was still asleep. His blanket had twisted around one leg. I fixed it automatically, then looked at the camera shelf. The camera was tilted down farther than I had left it, not dramatically, deliberately. I touched the side of it and found my fingertips shaking too much to get a clean grip. I reset it, harder this time, and checked the whole room. Closet closed. Window locked. Underbed clear. When I stepped back into the hallway, the guest room closet was open again. Not 2 inches this time, wide enough for darkness between the hanging coats. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the vent to come on and push warmer air across my bare arms. Long enough to hear the house settle somewhere below me and almost jump anyway. I kept telling myself there had to be a simple explanation that would still let the night be normal. A warped frame. The cat. Me forgetting, some overlap of sounds and nerves and bad angles that would look obvious in daylight. I needed that to be true. I needed so badly for the problem to be my perception and not the house. I went to close it again. What stopped me wasn't movement, it was the smell. Not detergent this time, not stale blankets. Something sharper under it, like skin after a long day in old clothes. A used air smell, the kind you notice when you get into a car that's been shut too long with someone in it. My throat went tight enough that swallowing hurt. I should have taken the kids and left right then, before I saw anything else. If I had, I think I could still convince myself sometimes that I overreacted. But I didn't. I leaned in and put my hand on the inside wall for balance. because my knees had started doing that weak, unreliable thing they do when adrenaline hits too fast. There was a charger plugged into the outlet inside the closet. White cord. Blocky cube. Not the loose coil from the office. This one was plugged in low near the floor behind a hanging row of coats, and when I touched the adapter with the back of my fingers, it was warm. Not room temperature. Warm. I made this small sound in my throat that I didn't mean to make. Then something shifted behind the coats. Slowly. Not like an animal startled. Not like an accident. More like somebody carefully repositioning weight so the hangers barely knocked together. I stumbled backward hard enough to hit the dresser. The wood edge caught my hip. I couldn't get enough air into my chest. I remember saying no once very quietly, like I was arguing with a thought. The coats moved again, not all at once, just a gentle, controlled parting somewhere deeper in the dark. I ran. I got to Theo first because he was closer, scooped him up so fast his head lagged for a second before he woke, and then I nearly dropped my phone trying to grab Macy with the other hand. She woke crying because I yanked her blanket off. I kept saying, "We have to go. We have to go right now," and she kept asking where her shoes were. Those are the details I hate. The stupid practical details your brain notices while it's failing. The sticky warmth of Theo's sleep suit against my arm. Macy's hair caught in the collar of my shirt. The baby monitor still on the guest bed where I'd thrown it without realizing. Halfway down the stairs, my phone buzzed in my hand. For one insane second, I thought it was help. Police, the parents, anyone. It was my checklist notification sound. I looked down because I couldn't not look. A green banner on the screen said nightly sweep complete. I hadn't finished the house. I almost fell. At the bottom of the stairs, I heard something overhead. Not running, not chasing, just one measured creak from the upstairs hall. The kind of sound a floor makes when someone shifts weight carefully. I didn't go for the front door because the alarm panel was there and I couldn't remember the code well enough to avoid setting it off with the kids in my arms. I went through the kitchen. The back door deadbolt scraped loud in the quiet, and for 1 second I thought it wasn't going to turn because my fingers were too slick. Then it opened onto the dark yard and cold air hit us hard enough to feel clean. Macy was crying full out now. Theo had started that confused whimper babies do before the real scream. I didn't bring coats. Didn't bring the diaper bag. Didn't bring my purse until I realized halfway to the car it was still on the kitchen chair, and then had to decide in 3 steps whether I was going back for it. I didn't. I got both kids buckled in with shaking hands that kept fumbling the clips. I called emergency services from the car with the engine running and all the doors locked. While I was talking, I kept watching the second-floor windows, expecting a face or a silhouette or anything. Nothing, just warm yellow light and curtains hanging still. Police came, then the parents, then more lights than seemed possible for one quiet street. The officers checked the whole house. Attic, basement, closets, garage, yard. They found nothing, no person. No sign of forced entry, no missing items that night. One of them asked if I was sure the charger wasn't the family's. I said I'd never seen it before. He put it in an evidence bag anyway. Another officer asked if maybe I'd panicked because of a noise and filled in the blanks. He wasn't rude. That almost made it worse. The parents didn't accuse me of anything. They were shaken, especially when I told them about the closet. They thanked me for getting the kids out. They said I did the right thing. Still, there was this loose edge to the rest of the night, like everyone was working around a hole in the center of it. No suspect, no explanation, no clean ending. I went home and borrowed sweatpants because Theo had spit up on my shirt in the car and I didn't even notice until much later. I never babysat again after that. Not there. Not anywhere. I got a job at a grocery store and told people my schedule had changed. For a few months after, I couldn't go to sleep without checking my apartment closet and touching the inside wall with my own hand, just to prove to myself it was cold and empty. I started waking up around 3 in the morning with the feeling that I had forgotten one room. Not a nightmare exactly, more like an unfinished task sitting on my chest. The family replaced the locks. They changed the monitor system. They even had the alarm company come out and inspect everything. As far as I know, no one ever found proof that somebody had been living in the house or hiding there regularly. That should comfort me. It doesn't. If anything, it makes the whole thing feel less finished. What I can't explain, and the part that still bothers me more than the movement in the closet, is my checklist. I know people hear that and think app glitch, accidental tap, simple answer. Maybe. But the office wasn't the only thing. When I looked at the screenshot later, the guest room had a timestamp on it from 3 minutes before I first went upstairs that night. 3 minutes before I ever touched that door. I still have the screenshot buried in an old folder because I couldn't make myself delete it, and every now and then I open it and look at that neat green check beside a room I had not entered yet, and I remember the used warmth inside that closet, like the house itself had already marked it done for me. I told myself for a long time that quitting babysitting was just practical. I was in school. I needed steadier money. I said that enough times that some part of me almost believed it. The truth is smaller and more embarrassing than that. I still use checklists, groceries, bills, work shifts, stupid ordinary things. But if a list has rooms on it, even hotel rooms when I'm traveling, I can't trust the first check mark. I always go back and look again. And I never keep a closet door shut all the way anymore. I need to see inside. I need the dark part visible. Because if there's one thing I learned in that house, it's that feeling safe and being alone are not the same thing. The next story reminds me of that too, because sometimes the worst thing isn't the person already inside. Sometimes it's the one willing to let you notice him from the street and stand there anyway. Story 2. The Man Across the Street. The part I remember most clearly is the smile. Not because it was big or dramatic. It wasn't. That's what made it so hard to explain later. He looked like somebody practicing the idea of a friendly expression without understanding what it was for. Just enough teeth. Just enough lift at the corners. And he was aiming it up toward the children's bedroom window like he'd been standing there long enough to know exactly which room it was. My name's Lenora. I was 31 when this happened, and I had been babysitting for the same family on and off for almost a year in Boulder, on a street lined with ash trees and narrow strips of dry grass that always smelled sun-baked even after dark. I'm one of those people who's usually fine by myself. I live alone, hike alone, drive long distances alone. Being in someone else's house at night never really bothered me. If anything, I liked the routine of it. Quiet kitchen, dishwasher humming, kids asleep, My own little pocket of time until the parents got home. At this house, after I put the kids to bed and cleaned up dinner, I'd usually go outside and jog laps around the block. Not far, just enough to shake off the stiffness from sitting. Same route every time. Right turn at the mailbox cluster, around the corner past the low stone wall, back along the opposite side of the street. 20 minutes, usually less. It was a mild summer night. Windows open in half the houses. Insects droning somewhere deep in the shrubs. Asphalt still giving off that dry, warm smell from the day. The streetlights on that block had this inconsistent flicker to them, so parts of the sidewalk were yellow and clear while other stretches dropped into dimmer shadow for a second. Before brightening again, the kids had gone down easily. Milo wanted an extra glass of water. June wanted me to leave the hallway door cracked, not wide, not shut. The exact halfway point she always wanted. By a little after 9:30, the house was clean enough. The baby monitor was clipped to my waistband, and I stepped outside in running shoes and an old college shirt, planning to do my usual few laps and head back in. On my second pass down the front of the house, I noticed a man standing across the street. That by itself wasn't a story. People stand around. They check phones, wait for rides, smoke, look at the sky, whatever. He was near the curb under one of the weaker streetlights, dark shirt, hands low at his sides, maybe facing slightly toward the sidewalk. I didn't stare because I didn't want to do that thing where you make eye contact with a stranger at night and suddenly both of you are aware of each other in a way neither person wants. I just kept going and told myself he was probably waiting for somebody from one of the houses. By the third lap he was still there. Same spot. Same posture. I noticed because I was trying not to notice. That's the honest version. I didn't want to be the woman who overreacts to a man standing in a neighborhood where he might have every right to be. And once you admit something feels off, you sort of assign yourself a role. Now you're the one monitoring it. Maybe calling someone. Maybe making a problem out of nothing. I didn't want that. The family trusted me. The neighborhood had always felt safe. Kids' bikes left on lawns, porch lights on timers, soft TV glow behind blinds. It felt ridiculous to take one stationary person and turn him into a threat. So I jogged past again. This time I saw his head turn. Not his shoulder, not his feet. Just his head. Slowly enough that I almost could have told myself it hadn't happened if the motion weren't so clean. He tracked me as I went by. I could feel it without looking directly. That sensation on the side of your face when you know somebody's attention is physically resting on you. I finished the lap and told myself he was watching a runner because runners are movement and movement catches the eye. That's normal. That's meaningless. That's not about me. I did another lap anyway. Same thing. Head turning a little as I passed, body still fixed like it had been set there. At that point I started getting annoyed, which was actually easier to manage than being uneasy. Annoyed meant I could stay rational. Some guy was being weird. That's all. Maybe rude, maybe socially off. But if I cut my run short because some stranger couldn't act normal on a public street, then I was letting him dictate my behavior, and that felt somehow worse than just finishing. I made it through one more pass before the baby monitor crackled with a sleepy little sound from inside the house. Probably June rolling over. That gave me an excuse I was relieved to take. I slowed, stretched for a few seconds near the front walk like I had planned to stop anyway, and went back inside without looking directly across the street. The house felt colder after outside air conditioning low, hardwood cool through my socks. Dishwasher making that soft water rush sound in the kitchen. I locked the front door again even though it had been locked already. I checked the monitor. Both kids asleep. Normal. Then I looked through the front window. He had moved. Not closer to the porch, still across the street. But now he was facing directly toward the house. My chest tightened in this small private way, not panic, just the body adjusting to a new interpretation. From inside, with the glass reflecting part of my own living room back at me, he looked flatter, less like a person waiting and more like a shape intentionally placed there. I took one step back from the window because if he could see in, I didn't want him to know I was watching him. This is where a more decisive person probably would have called the parents or even the non-emergency line. I know that, but all I had at that point was a man standing on a public street. He hadn't come onto the property. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't made any actual move I could describe without hearing myself sound dramatic. I imagined trying to explain it. He's just standing there. He turned his head when I ran by. He's facing the house now. It all sounded thin as soon as I arranged it into words. So I did the thing people do when they don't want to commit to fear. I adjusted the environment. I closed the front blinds partway. I turned off the lamp nearest the window so the glass would reflect less of the room. I checked the lock on the sliding door. Then I busied myself wiping a perfectly clean counter while telling myself that if he was still there in 10 minutes, then maybe I'd do something sensible. 10 minutes later, he was still there. The porch light flickered once while I was looking. Just a quick cut and return, that weird electrical blink old bulbs do. But in that blink, in the instant of dark, something about his position changed enough that when the light came back, I felt my stomach drop. He seemed closer, not dramatically. Still out near the street. Still across from the house. But not where he'd been. And I had not seen him walk. I actually rubbed the side of my face with my palm like that would reset my eyes. Then I laughed once, quietly, because the alternatives were getting bigger and I didn't want them. Of course I hadn't seen him move. I had been watching through blinds, through glass, with reflections. People take a few steps. Streetlights play tricks. It's normal. It had to be normal. I texted the mom, casual again. Hey, random question, do people ever wait for rides out front on your street? She didn't answer right away. I texted a friend instead, a dumb little message about a neighborhood statue man trying to make it sound funny. She sent back, you lock the door. I was already past that. I checked the monitor. Still sleeping. June had kicked off one sock. Milo's night light glowed orange at the edge of the frame. I told myself if the man was still there at 10:30, I'd wake the kids, call the parents, and leave. Giving it a deadline made me feel more in control. It turned fear into a task. Just make it to 10:30 and reassess. At 10:30 he was gone. The spot across the street was empty. I remember the relief coming so fast it almost made me lightheaded. I stood at the window longer than I should have, scanning left and right for him, and because I didn't see him anywhere, my brain rushed in to clean up the situation for me. See, he was waiting for someone. Or he lived nearby. Or he got bored and left. Or maybe I'd built the whole thing bigger because I was alone and had too much empty house around me. The mom texted back a minute later. Sorry, just saw this. Sometimes delivery people park out there. Why? I typed, no reason, just saw somebody out front earlier. All good. Then deleted the part about earlier and sent only no reason. All good. That's the kind of decision that bothers me now. Not because it would have solved anything if I'd told her, but because I can see exactly how badly I wanted the normal version. I wanted to be the competent sitter who handled a mildly odd thing and moved on. I did not want to be the person whose judgment had turned a quiet street into a scene. I went upstairs to check on the kids in person because seeing them usually reset me. June's room smelled like strawberry shampoo and warm cotton. Her stuffed fox was under one arm. Milo snored once in that tiny stuffed-up way kids do. I stood between their rooms listening to the house, just listening. Pipes, air, insects outside, distant car on a larger road. Then something made me look out the upstairs window at the end of the hall. I still don't know if it was a sound or instinct or just the part of me that hadn't actually calmed down. He was there. Not where he'd been before. He was standing directly across from the children's bedroom, on the far side of the street looking up. From that angle I could finally see his face clearly enough to register features. Pale forehead under the streetlight. Short hair, maybe thinning. Eyes aimed upward. Mouth held in that fixed, practiced smile like he was showing someone he'd learned the shape of friendliness and was waiting to be told if it was correct. I ducked back so fast my shoulder hit the wall. The impact sent a little burst of pain down my arm, but what I noticed most was my pulse. I could feel it in my throat, in the roof of my mouth, loud enough that it seemed like an external sound. I crouched under the window and tried to think. Call the parents. Call the police. Close the kids' curtains first. No. Don't go near the windows. No. Close them. Do something. My thoughts had that brittle speed where each one feels urgent and useless at the same time. I risked another look from the side. Still there, still looking up, and because fear makes you search for details you wish you didn't have, I saw that his smile was slightly different now. Wider on one side than the other, as if the expression was getting tired, but he was keeping it in place anyway. I called the mom. Straight to voicemail. I called the dad. Ringing. No answer. Downstairs something tapped the front porch. Not a knock. Maybe a branch, maybe nothing. I froze so hard my calves started cramping. The man outside never approached the house. That's the part people expect to change when I tell this. He never came up the walk, never tested the door, never made a scene. He only watched. But once you're sure you're being watched, it fills the whole house anyway. It gets into each room before the person ever does. I made the decision then, not because he had crossed some clean line, but because I realized I'd already started editing the story to make it sound acceptable, and that meant I was in deeper than I should. I went into June's room first, got her up half asleep, then Milo. He cried because I put his shoes on without socks. I didn't care. I threw blankets around both of them, grabbed my bag, the house keys the parents had left me, and the emergency contact sheet off the fridge. While I was doing that, I kept imagining looking up and seeing him in a different window, a different position, closer somehow without proof. I moved room to room, feeling like the house plan had changed. Every doorway seemed too open. Every stretch of hall felt visible. I called the parents again while carrying Milo downstairs. This time the dad picked up, voice thick with restaurant noise in the background. I didn't explain well. I said there was a man outside who'd been watching the house and I was taking the kids to my car and leaving. He started asking questions I couldn't answer quickly enough. What did he do? Is he still there? Did he say anything? I just said, I'm not waiting to find out. At the front door I stopped because I didn't want to step out where he could see us from the wrong angle. So I went through the garage instead, holding June's hand too tight, lifting Milo because he had gone limp with sleep again. The garage smelled like rubber and cut grass. The automatic door sounded unbelievably loud. My hands were shaking so much I hit the remote twice. I checked across the street before loading them in. He was still there. Same place. Same upward tilt of his face. He turned his head toward the garage only after the second child was in the back seat. Slow. Deliberate. Like he'd known all along I would leave this way eventually and there was no need to rush. I got in, backed out too fast, corrected, then drove without looking directly at him again. In the mirror, for 1 second between trees and parked cars, I could still see that pale suggestion of a face turned toward the house we were leaving. The parents met me at a gas station a few blocks away. The mom took one look at me and stopped asking for a minute. My shirt was stuck to my back with sweat even though the night wasn't that warm anymore. Milo had fallen asleep with his head bent at a bad angle. June kept asking if we were going back to get her fox. The dad wanted to call the police right then. I said he could. Obviously he could, but I didn't want to return and point out a man on a street if the only thing he had done was stand there and look at windows. They did call. An officer drove through later, they told me, and didn't find anyone. That should have flattened the whole story into a misunderstanding. It didn't. I never ran that block again. I didn't babysit for them after dark after that either, and eventually I stopped going to that neighborhood altogether, even during the day. The hard part to explain is how completely it changed the feeling of routine. I used to think familiarity made a place trustworthy. Same streets, same trees, same porch lights, same loop around the block. After that, repetition started to feel staged, like the set of a place instead of the place itself. Something you only realize when one person in it refuses to behave normally and nothing else adjusts to account for it. The question I still come back to is the broad one, not the dramatic one, not who he was, not what he wanted, though of course I think about those too. What I can't stop wondering is scope. Was that night special because I happened to notice him? Or was he part of the background on that street for longer than anybody understood? Had he stood there before when the parents were home, when no sitter was jogging laps, when nobody had reason to look from the upstairs hall at just the right time? I don't know. I only know that months later, when I drove the long way around that neighborhood to avoid it, I caught myself scanning the far side of every residential street for a person, standing too still, and what always comes back first is not his face. It's the way I kept giving him more time to become harmless and how the street stayed quiet enough to let me do it. I used to think watching was passive, that if someone only looked and never crossed onto your property, never spoke, never touched anything, then whatever was wrong hadn't fully arrived yet. I don't think that anymore. Being watched long enough changes the shape of a place. It tells you where the vulnerable windows are. It tells you which parts of your routine are visible from the outside. And once you understand that, even normal houses start to feel like diagrams. The next story is the one that finally broke me on doorbells, because sometimes the person outside isn't only watching. Sometimes they're timing you. Story 3. The doorbell pattern. The first thing I remember clearly is the knife in my hand. Not picking it up. Not deciding to. Just standing in the kitchen at around 2:13 in the morning with a steak knife angled down by my thigh and the wall clock ticking so loud it sounded fake, like a sound effect added afterward. The doorbell had rung 3 times in a pattern I still hear when I can't sleep. 2 short presses, 1 long. By then I already knew someone was outside, and I had started to understand someone else wasn't where they were supposed to be. If I tell this in the right order, it starts earlier with a delivery that never arrived. But the truth is, when I think of that night, I enter it there, in that kitchen, with a knife I didn't remember taking from the block and my whole body braced for whichever door failed first. My name is Corinne. I was 42 then, and I had been doing overnight childcare and elder care off and on for years. I don't mean casually. I mean professionally alone. Hospital pickups, medication schedules, parents delayed by weather, emergency calls, all the stuff that requires a person who can stay calm in other people's homes at ugly hours. I carried a spare car seat in my trunk because you don't get through enough care jobs without eventually needing one. I had handled asthma attacks, power outages, one truly awful coyote encounter in a yard in Hilliard, and the kind of kitchen fires people swear weren't fires because they put them out fast enough. So when I say I wasn't easily rattled, I mean that in a practical sense. I had frameworks. Keep the kids contained. Control entry points. Verify before reacting. That framework helped me a lot in life. It did not help me enough that night. The house was a split level on the northwest side of Columbus, off a road with too many identical mailboxes and one of those retaining walls out front that always smell damp. After sunset, I arrived just before evening. The parents were headed to a wedding out of town and wouldn't be back until late the next morning. 2 kids, both school age, easy bedtime. The house still smelled faintly of reheated pasta when they left, tomato sauce and warm plastic from a takeout container in the trash. There was a wall clock near the kitchen archway with a sharp mechanical tick that carried farther than it should have, and the doorbell had this long, echoing tone like the chime box had too much empty space in it, so every ring seemed to linger in the hallway half a second after it stopped. The ordinary part was ordinary. Homework folders signed. Baths. One argument about which blanket belonged to whom. I checked the locks, noticed the doorbell camera monitor on the homeowner's app, and felt that small satisfaction you get from a well-secured house. Front camera working. Back camera working. Motion alerts on. I set my bag by the couch, put my car keys in the bowl by the entry, and mentally noted where the flashlights were. Kids down by a little after 9:30. Dishes rinsed, house quiet. At 10-something, the homeowner's app sent a delivery notification. Package delivered at front door. I looked out through the glass insert beside the door. No package. That didn't trouble me much. Missed deliveries happened constantly. The app photo was useless too, one of those blurred frames that showed mostly concrete and the lower half of the porch column. I figured somebody had dropped it at the wrong address or the notification had lagged from earlier. I checked the porch once, locked up again, and went back to the couch. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. 2 short presses. 1 long. I remember looking at the clock before I moved, because that pattern had enough intention to it that I noticed it right away. There are random rings, impatient rings, kid rings. This wasn't that. It sounded like a signal. I checked the camera feed before approaching the door. A man stood on the porch, mid-30s maybe, baseball cap, one hand in his pocket. I spoke through the intercom. He said, "Package got delivered here by mistake." Voice calm, not slurred, not aggressive. I told him nothing had been left outside and asked which house he needed. He gave a street number that was close, not exact. He even sounded mildly embarrassed. Normal enough that my first thought was honestly that he had every reason to be annoyed and I could solve it in 30 seconds by showing him the empty porch. What stopped me was the edge of another shape on the camera feed. A shoulder, maybe. Dark fabric at the far left margin. "Are you alone?" I asked. He glanced sideways, then back to the lens. "My brother's in the car." It was plausible. Everything about that answer was plausible. But there was no car visible from the camera angle, and he had looked the wrong way for a driveway park. It was a tiny thing, the kind of discrepancy experienced people are supposed to clock and file, not dramatize. So I told him I couldn't open the door, but if he had tracking info, he could contact the carrier. He said okay in a neutral voice and stepped back out of frame. I checked the feed again 10 seconds later. Empty porch. At a little before 11, the doorbell rang again. 2 short, 1 long. Same man, same cap. Only this time he stood a little farther from the door, and the left edge of the frame was empty. I didn't answer immediately. He waited, looking not at the camera but at the narrow strip of glass beside the door, as if he knew that's where a person inside might stand back from the lens. Then he spoke without me activating the intercom, just checking the package. That put a cold line straight through my concentration. Not because the words were threatening. Because he already knew I was there, and he wanted me to know he knew. I spoke through the app this time from the couch instead of the hallway, just to test whether he would react to the sound source. "There's no package here." He nodded once to the camera. "Okay." Then he stepped off the porch. I checked the side windows. Nothing. Back feed. Empty patio grill cover flapping a little in the breeze. I should mention here that I still wasn't frightened in the way people mean when they say frightened. I was alert, irritated. I had seen enough odd late-night visitors in care jobs to know that the first useful tool is structure. Document time, do not open, verify exits, keep phone charged. My framework, my old reliable framework. I texted myself the ring times so I'd have them. Then I noticed the gap, almost exactly 20 minutes each. That was my first real wrong note. At midnight, the doorbell rang again. 2 short. 1 long. This time when I opened the front camera, the man wasn't centered. He stood off to the right, leaving more of the porch visible. I could see empty space where a package would be. He wasn't really asking anymore, he was demonstrating the absence with me. I said, "I've told you already, you're at the wrong house." He leaned slightly closer to the speaker. Then why'd it notify delivered? It wasn't the grammar. It was the rehearsed flatness. The way he said it, like a line fed into a machine and spoken back out. Before I could answer, motion tripped on the back camera. I switched feeds. A second figure stood near the fence gate, too far from the weak patio light for features, just a vertical block of dark at the edge of the yard. My scalp prickled so hard it felt like pressure. I switched back to the front. The man was still there, switched back. The figure at the fence had not moved. That's when my framework started failing me. Because now I had coordination. Not random late-night confusion. Not a neighbor issue. Two positions. Front and back. And because I had dealt with aggressive situations before, I did what experience taught me. I got the kids together in one room. I turned off unnecessary lights. I took my keys from the bowl and put them in my pocket. I called the parents. No answer. Wedding reception. Loud room. Predictable. I nearly called the police right then, and maybe I should have. What stopped me was the same thing that stops competent people too often. The threshold question. What do I have that dispatch can act on besides two people standing outside a locked house? Suspicion is real. It just doesn't sound strong when you say it into a phone. At 12:20 the bell rang again. Two short. One long. The kids were awake by then. Both sitting in the upstairs bedroom I'd moved them into with blankets around their shoulders, trying to treat it like an adventure because that was. Better than telling them I thought men were circling the house. I put the app on speaker for the older one so he could hear me calmly say everything was fine, because children borrow their fear from your voice. The doorbell camera glitched while I was watching. The picture smeared green and black for 1 second. When it came back, the porch man was still there. The second figure was gone from the back feed. I checked every angle 3 times. Patio empty, side yard empty, fence line empty. That was worse. I don't mean emotionally worse in some abstract way. I mean operationally worse. A visible problem at the back door is at least a location. An invisible one is only possibility. I went to the kitchen to get water for the kids because my mouth had gone dry enough that my tongue stuck to my teeth, and I saw my own hand reach for the knife block before I had consciously decided to arm myself. The steel felt colder than the room. Then I waited. That was the longest stretch of the night, maybe 40 minutes, maybe more. No bell. No knocks. Just clock tick, refrigerator hum, children shifting on borrowed pillows, and my own breathing trying too hard not to sound strained. I kept watching the app logs. Front motion, then nothing. Back motion, then nothing. The intervals no longer regular, which meant either they'd given up or they'd moved to the phase where they no longer needed me to notice the pattern. At around 2:13, the doorbell rang again. 2 short. 1 long. I was already in the kitchen with the knife by then, looking from the phone to the dark hall, because at the exact same second the ring started, the back door handle moved. Slowly, not a rattle, not a test jiggle. The lever pressed down with steady pressure from the outside until it hit its stop and stayed there for a heartbeat too long before easing back up. My body reacted before my head did. Every muscle locked so hard my shoulders ached. The metallic taste at the back of my throat came up so fast I thought I might actually be sick. On the app, an alert stacked over another alert. Front door activity. Backdoor activity. Same timestamp, same second. The bell echoed through the entry hall while the back handle turned again, and I understood, not conceptually but physically, that the pattern had never been random. The front man wasn't trying to get in. He was keeping my attention aimed forward on a schedule. Every ring had trained me where to look and when. I called emergency services then. Finally, voice low, too tight, one hand over the microphone so the kids wouldn't hear the actual shape of it. I gave the address. I said there were 2 men at the house, one at the front, at least one at the back, and someone was trying the door. The dispatcher kept me talking. That helped more than I can explain. Instructions: create temporary walls. Lock yourself in a room if you can. I couldn't. Not without abandoning one entrance or the other and crossing open space with the kids. Do not engage. Too late already had. Officers are on the way. That sentence is useful and useless at the same time when minutes still exist between you and it. The bell rang again while I was on the line. Same pattern. The back handle pressed down again, harder now, and something scraped low against the door like a shoe sole adjusting on the mat. The dispatcher asked if I could hear voices. I said no. Then I did. Front intercom speaker, a man's voice, calm as before. Need the package. At the same time, from somewhere very near the rear glass, a second voice, quieter, said, almost not to me, to the other one. I felt the skin between my shoulder blades go damp under my shirt. That was the pivot. The moment my old experience finally failed me. I had handled drunks, panic, confusion, opportunists testing a door. This was prepared. Timed. Cooperative. They were not improvising around me. They had brought a method. I shoved a dining chair under the back knob, even though I knew chairs are more reassurance than barrier. I moved the kids into the upstairs bathroom because it had no street-facing window. The younger one started crying for real then, that hiccuping, full-chest crying kids do when they realize the grown-up voice has changed. I told them we were playing a quiet game. I hated myself while I said it. Below us, the bell rang again. Not the full pattern this time. Just one short press, almost playful. The dispatcher said officers were turning onto the street. I don't know if the men heard that through some police radio scanner or just saw headlights, but the house changed instantly. The pressure vanished. Back handle still. Porch silent. No final threat, no pounding, no sprint across gravel, just absence. By the time officers came in with flashlights and cleared the rooms, the yard was empty. They found footprints, though. Damp soil behind the gate had held them. One set circling the back patio and side path, another near the front walkway. Not random pacing. Loops, repeated routes between entrances. Patient ones. The officers told me that part carefully, like information delivered in measured doses might land softer. It didn't. The parents drove back before dawn, wrecked with guilt and still dressed for the wedding. I stayed long enough to give my statement twice. Then I sat in my car with the spare seat in the trunk rattling softly when I pulled out of the driveway, and I realized my hands were still holding the steering wheel in the exact shape they'd held the knife. People ask if I quit after that. I didn't, not immediately. Necessity isn't heroic, it's just expensive. I kept working, but I changed systems. I parked facing out, I learned doorbell brands, I made sure every family knew I would call police earlier than felt polite. The pattern still gets me, though. Too short, one long. A dishwasher beep in the wrong rhythm. A knock from a delivery driver who presses twice and then leans. Anything even close and I feel my chest tighten before I can stop it. The question I can't shut off is the near miss inside the whole thing. If I had opened the door during the first ring, when it still sounded like a simple mistake, would both of them have been standing there? Or just one? I don't mean that as a dramatic line. I mean practically. The whole structure of the night suggests the first man was built to look solvable, ordinary, the kind of problem a capable adult opens a door to manage. The second one stayed out of frame until the frame mattered. I still replay that because the difference between one man at a porch and two men at two doors was the difference between a strange interruption and whatever they were actually planning to do. And sometimes, when a doorbell rings after dark, I catch myself counting the silence after it, listening for the second entrance to answer. People think the worst part of a night like that is the obvious threat. It isn't. It's the realization that you are being taught a rhythm without knowing it. Once you feel that, every repeated sound starts to feel instructional. Every pattern wants something from you. The next story unsettles me for a different reason. No pattern, no signal. Just wrong little pieces that only made a picture once it was too late to stop looking. Story 4, the basement playroom. What bothers me now isn't the figure on the stairs, even though that's the part that sounds the most severe when I tell it out loud. It's the toys. The way they changed one small piece at a time until I started participating without meaning to. That's the thing I didn't understand until later. I thought I was investigating the arrangement. I think now the arrangement might have been investigating me back. My name's Talia. I was 23 then, taking overnight babysitting jobs on purpose because I liked the extra money and, honestly, I liked being the person who could handle them. I was comfortable alone. I always brought my own pillow to overnight jobs because strange pillowcases make it hard for me to sleep, and families used to laugh when I'd show up with this faded gray one, tucked under my arm like I was checking into camp. The house was outside Des Moines, far enough out that the road narrowed and the dark got less suburban and more open. The parents were paying unusually well for one night with two kids who mostly slept through anything. And I texted my friend on the drive there that either I had found the easiest money of my week or I was about to end up in a cautionary tale. The place itself looked normal. Big rural house, gravel drive, mudroom entrance, toys everywhere in the living room. The kind of warm clutter that makes a family house feel used in a reassuring way. The odd note came early, but softly. While they were leaving, the mom told me not to go into the basement because it wasn't finished and there were exposed nails and storage stuff everywhere. That wasn't strange by itself. Lots of unfinished basements are hazards. Still, when she said it, she lowered her voice a little even though the kids were nowhere near us. I noticed that and filed it away without really giving it shape. The house smelled like dinner had recently happened. Butter, dish soap, a little dog smell even though I never saw a dog. Under that, near the hall that led to the basement door, there was a damp, earthy smell, cool and mineral like wet cardboard in a garage. The kids went down easy. One wanted the bathroom light on. The other wanted the frog blanket, not the dinosaur blanket. By a little before midnight, both were asleep upstairs and I had my own pillow on the couch, my charger plugged in, and a text thread going with my friend about the high pay. That's when I saw the toy at the top of the basement stairs. It was a plastic horse, blue with one wheel missing, positioned neatly on the floor right in front of the closed basement door. I hadn't seen it earlier. I was pretty sure of that. But houses with kids have objects migrating around all the time, and I was not going to become the person who turned a toy into a sign. I picked it up, set it in the toy bin by the fireplace, and went back to the couch. Maybe 15 minutes later, I walked past again on the way to the kitchen. A different toy sat there. This one was a little wooden block painted with a yellow star. I crouched and just looked at it. Because once is easy to dismiss. Twice asks for a mechanism. I texted my friend, either I am way more tired than I thought or these stairs are generating toys. She sent back 6 laughing emojis and then, stop going near murder basement. That should have been enough. A joke, a shrug, back to normal. Instead, I opened my camera and took a photo of the toy where it sat. Not because I was frightened, because I was curious. That's my problem in situations like that. If something is odd, I want to verify whether it's actually odd. I want data, proof it's changing, proof I'm not just building meaning out of ordinary house mess. I moved the block to the bin. The next time I checked, there were 2 toys at the top of the stairs, side by side. A red truck and a little plastic spoon from a play kitchen set, both pointed toward the hall. That got me. Not fear exactly. More a physical sense of the scene stepping 1 inch away from normal. The damp smell near the basement door seemed stronger then. The air there was colder too, enough that the skin on my forearms tightened when I stood over the threshold. I opened the basement door a few inches and listened. Dripping somewhere below. Slow. Hollow. A drop sound that seemed to land farther away than the stairs should allow. "Hello?" I said softly, already hating myself for saying it. "Nothing." I turned on the stairlight, weak bulb, yellow cone, concrete steps descending and curving out of view, no movement, no obvious problem. I shut the door and instead of deciding to stop, I did the more dangerous thing, which was decide to pay attention. After that, I started making little notes in my phone. Time. Arrangement. Sound or no sound. If the house was playing tricks on me, I wanted a record of the trick. If the kids were somehow sneaking down and doing this, I wanted to catch the pattern. At around 12:30, there were 5 toys in a line across the top of the stairs. At 12:47, they formed a rough circle. At 1 in the morning, while I was standing in the hall looking down at that circle and trying to decide whether it actually had meaning or if I was lending it meaning because I was now invested, I heard steps from below. Slow ones. Not loud, just the soft weight of someone placing a foot carefully on wood and then stopping. Another one, then stillness. I moved toward the door and the steps stopped immediately. That detail matters. They stopped the moment I approached, as if whatever was below was listening as hard as I was. I opened the door again, wider this time. The cold from the stairwell touched my shins first. The bulb hummed faintly overhead. I leaned far enough to see the first turn of the stairs. Empty. The smell down there was heavier, with the door open, damp concrete and something dusty like old stuffed animals stored in cardboard boxes. Then a voice came from below. A child's voice, or something very close to one. Small, whispery, carrying oddly in the concrete space. It said Nora. That wasn't my name. I stayed very still. My first thought was one of the kids was somehow awake and in the basement, which made no sense because I would have heard them come downstairs. My second thought was the house had some old ventilation quirk or a TV sound or a toy with batteries half dying. That second thought only existed because I wanted one. I knew it didn't really fit. I went upstairs and checked the kids, both asleep. One sprawled sideways, one with open mouth breathing, cheeks flushed with sleep. Back in the hall, the toys at the top of the basement stairs had changed again. Not a circle now, more of an arc opening toward the living room. That was when the whole thing shifted for me from strange event to assembled evidence. Because I had the photos, I had the timestamps, I had the text thread. The toys were not just appearing, they were reconfiguring, and I could feel, in a way that's hard to explain without sounding dramatic, that the arrangement was becoming more intentional the more I noticed it. I made the worst smart decision of the night, which was to test it. I placed 3 toys myself near the door. Deliberately, a green dinosaur, the blue horse, the yellow star block. Then I went into the kitchen and counted to 100 with my phone timer running. No sounds while I waited except the refrigerator motor and that slow drip from below once the house got quiet enough. When I came back, the 3 toys were no longer where I had left them. The dinosaur was turned to face the stairs. The block had moved closer to the crack under the door. The horse was gone. I didn't think. I opened the basement door all the way and stepped onto the first stair. The light reached farther than I'd expected, enough to show unfinished walls, stacks of plastic storage bins, a child-sized plastic table on its side, and then deeper dark where the ceiling dropped lower. I took one more step and heard breathing, not mine. Lower. Wet at the edges. At first I couldn't locate it because sound in concrete spaces does that ugly bouncing thing. Then I saw the shape. Someone was crouched below the turn in the stairs, mostly hidden by the angle facing upward. I could only see the top half of a head, one shoulder, and the outline of hands resting on a step. Still as furniture except for the breathing, slow in, slow out. The head tilted a little when I shifted my weight, not much. Just enough to show it had been tracking me the whole time. Every part of my body went weak and sharp at once. My hands lost their feeling first. Then my chest tightened so quickly I had to pull air in through my teeth. I backed up without taking my eyes off the stairs. One step, then another. And the figure didn't lunge or speak or do anything helpful for explanation. It only stayed crouched there, listening. That made it worse. A threat that waits for you to supply the next move is its own kind of control. I shut the basement door and shoved the hall bench against it. Then the kitchen chair. Then the little umbrella stand, even though it was useless weight. My own breathing got loud and ragged, and I had to force my hands to work because they kept slipping on smooth wood and painted metal like they no longer belonged to me. The rest of the night was endurance. That's the plainest way to say it. I didn't sleep. I stayed upstairs with the kids after moving the bench from below to add against the topside hall if the door gave. I had my phone in one hand and the longest fireplace poker I could find in the other, which was ridiculous, and also the only thing available. The sounds came intermittently until sunrise. A slow tread on the stairs, stopping below the door. A faint bump, like a toy nudged against wood. Once, a soft roll and tap in the hall outside, and when I forced myself to look from the bedroom doorway, a single plastic spoon sat halfway between the basement door and the foot of the stairs to the kids' rooms. That was impossible if the door was secure. I know how it sounds, but I know where I had left that spoon earlier, and I know where it was then, gleaming white in the weeknight light from the bathroom. I called the parents just before dawn and said they needed to come home now. I did not explain well. Then I called a friend and kept her on speaker for almost an hour just so another human voice would exist in the house with me. When morning finally came, the light through the windows made everything flatter and more stupid looking, which would have been a relief if the spoon had not still been there. I left as soon as the parents got back. The dad apologized for the basement, but in a weird, incomplete way, like he was apologizing for inconvenience rather than danger. I never contacted them again. The payment arrived through the app that afternoon exactly as promised, with a larger tip than agreed. I did not reply. Later that day, I went through the photos on my phone. That was the real assembly. In sequence, the toy arrangements changed from random-looking to directional. The line, the circle, the arc. In the last photo before I opened the basement door, the toys were positioned in a shape that looked meaningless until I turned the phone sideways. Then I realized it matched the upstairs layout almost exactly. Living room, hall, the room where the kids slept, the couch where I'd left my pillow. I don't know why that was done. I don't know whether the person in the basement had been sheltering there, hiding there, waiting for the family to leave, or just taking advantage of a house with an unfinished lower level and a sitter too curious to ignore small wrongness. Opportunist is the closest word I have for it, and even that feels neat in a way the memory isn't. What I know is that the toys only made sense after I started trying to understand them. That part still bothers me most. As if noticing was the last ingredient needed for the pattern to finish becoming a message. I still bring my own pillow when I travel, but now I leave it in the car until I'm sure I know which parts of a house are actually empty. People like clean explanations because they restore proportion. A trespasser. A mentally ill drifter. Someone hiding from the weather. Those are all possible. Maybe one of them is even true, but none of them really covers the breathing on the stairs or the way the toys kept rearranging into forms that only became recognizable after I had started documenting them. That's what sits wrong in me. Not the figure itself. The cooperation. The sense that I got curious and something below understood curiosity as permission. Even now, if I pass a closed basement door in a quiet house, I look at the floor first. Not for footprints. For objects that weren't there the first time. For the first small piece of a pattern, trying to see if I'll help finish it. Story 5. He knew their routine. I knew it had gone bad before he ever tried the handle. That's the part I keep returning to. Not because I'm proud of catching it, but because I almost didn't. I almost let the whole thing stay inside the category of family friend, neighbor, somebody harmless but socially odd. If he had been a little less precise, if he had copied me a little better, I think I would have opened the door. My name's Nadine. I was 28 then, living in Arlington and taking babysitting work, because rent doesn't care whether your main job hours got cut. I never liked being alone in other people's houses, especially townhouses where every hallway and stairwell carries sound farther than seems physically reasonable. But I had my habits. I kept a handwritten notebook with each child's bedtime details, partly for the parents and partly because kids settle better when somebody remembers the exact order of their little rituals. Green cup, then teeth. One story, then song. Hall light cracked. Socks off before blanket. It made me feel useful and organized in a job that can otherwise turn into just waiting in the dark. The house was a townhouse in Arlington on a late winter evening, close enough to the main road that you could hear city traffic as a constant low wash behind everything else. Inside there was that dry, dusty smell heating systems get the first cold weeks they're really running. The kids were easy. One wanted the bathroom door open a little. One wanted me to check under the bed even though he was too old for that and knew it. I wrote a few notes in my notebook after they were asleep and settled into the living room expecting a quiet night. A little before 10, somebody knocked. Not pounded, just a normal knock at first. I checked the peephole and saw a man standing in the hall outside, mid-30s maybe, dark coat, empty hands visible. Apartment and townhouse hallways have a way of amplifying footsteps and little shifts, so even before I opened the inner door cover I could hear him breathing faintly on the other side, calm and steady. Then he said my name, Nadine. I remember relaxing a fraction, which is horrible to admit now. Then he said, I didn't want to wake Ava if she's already doing the thumb thing. Ava was one of the kids. She sucked her thumb when she got drowsy. It sounded exactly like the kind of thing a relative would know. An uncle, a neighbor, someone who'd been there at pickup before. I didn't open the door, but I did step closer and ask who he was. He smiled a little, not through the peephole because